Friends, you want to watch super hit movie Man of Steel in English. Then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Man of Steel. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you. I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. Man of Steel is a 2013 superhero film based on the DC Comics character Superman. Produced by Warner Bros. Pictures, Legendary Pictures, DC Entertainment, and Syncope, it was directed by Zack Snyder from a screenplay written by David S. Goyer, who developed the story with producer Christopher Nolan. The film is a reboot of the Superman film series, depicting the character's origin story, and it is the first installment in the DC Extended Universe, DCEU. Man of Steel stars Henry Cavill as Superman in the title role, along with Amy Adams, Michael Shannon, Kevin Costner, Diane Lane, Lawrence Fishburne, and Russell Crowe. In the film, Clark Kent learns that he is a superpowered alien from the planet Krypton. He assumes the role of mankind's protector as Superman, making the choice to face General Zod and stop him from destroying humanity. Development began in 2008 when Warner Bros. Took pitches from comic book writers, screenwriters, and directors, opting to reboot the franchise. In 2009, a court ruling resulted in Jerry Siegel's family recapturing the rights to Superman's origins and Siegel's copyright. The decision stated that Warner Bros. Did not owe the families additional royalties from previous films, but if they did not begin production on a Superman film by 2011, then the Schuster and Siegel estates would be able to sue for lost revenue on an unproduced film. Nolan pitched Goyer's idea after a story discussion on The Dark Knight Rises, and Snyder was hired as the film's director in October 2010. Principal photography began in August 2011 in West Chicago, Illinois, before moving to Vancouver and Plano, Illinois. Man of Steel premiered in the Alice Tully Hall in New York City on June 10, 2013, and was released by Warner Bros. Pictures in the United States on June 14. Critics felt the film's visually appealing action sequences were not enough to overcome its descent into generic blockbuster territory, and they were divided over Cavill's performance as Superman. It grossed $670 million worldwide, becoming the 9th highest-grossing film of 2013. A follow-up, titled Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, was released on March 25, 2016. Plot: the film is presented in a non-linear narrative, with the protagonist's childhood and teenage years told in flashbacks as he recollects them. The following is a linear summary of the plot. The planet Krypton is destabilizing from the mining of the planetary core. Just before the planet explodes, Krypton's top scientist, Jor-El, steals and infuses the genetics codex into his newborn son, Kal-El, the first naturally born Kryptonian in centuries. Jor-El manages to send Kal-El in a spacecraft toward Earth before being killed by General Zod during a coup d'etat. Kal-El lands in Kansas, where he is adopted by Jonathan and Martha Kent and named Clark. As he grows older, due to his Kryptonian physiology and Earth's yellow sun, he develops superhuman powers that Jonathan urges him to keep hidden, even refusing Clark's help years later during a tornado storm where he loses his life. Burdened with guilt over Jonathan's death, Clark travels the globe hiding under various aliases seeking a purpose in life. Daily Planet reporter Lois Lane receives an assignment to investigate the discovery of a Kryptonian scout ship in the Arctic. Clark enters the ship disguised as a worker and learns from its artificial intelligence, modeled after his father Jor-El, about his origins, and that Clark was sent to Earth to help guide its people. While following Clark, Lois inadvertently triggers the ship's security system, and he uses his powers to rescue her from its defenses. He wears a uniform provided by the ship's AI and begins testing his abilities. Unable to convince Supervisor Perry White to publish an article on the incident, Lois tracks down Clark in Smallville with the intent of exposing him. However, Lois drops the story upon hearing of Jonathan Kent's sacrifice, keeping Clark's identity safe while fueling Perry's suspicions. Zod and his crew escape the Phantom Zone, where they were imprisoned for treason for their actions against Krypton. They travel to Earth to turn it into a new Krypton, possessing several terraforming devices salvaged from Kryptonian outposts. Following Clark and Lois's capture, Zod's science officer, Jax extracts some of Clark's genes so as to create new Kryptonians who will build a society based on Zod's ideals of genetic purity. Using the Jor-El AI to take over the ship, Clark and Lois flee and warn the U.S. military of Zod's plan, resulting in a confrontation between Clark and Zod's troops. Zod deploys his most powerful terraforming device, the World Engine, which severely damages Metropolis and risks humanity's extinction. Clark destroys the terraforming platform, while the military launches an attack on the Black Zero, sending Zod's troops back to the Phantom Zone. With the ship destroyed and Krypton's only hope of revival gone, Zod vows to destroy Earth and its inhabitants out of revenge. The two Kryptonians engage in a lengthy battle across Metropolis, which concludes when Clark is forced to kill Zod as the latter attacks a family trapped in a train station. Sometime later, Clark adopts the moniker Superman and persuades the government to let him act independently under the condition he does not turn against humanity. To gain covert access to dangerous situations, he takes a job under his civilian identity, Clark Kent, as a reporter for the Daily Planet. Cast. Further information. List of DC Extended Universe cast members and characters of the DC Extended Universe. Henry Cavill as Kal-El, Clark Kent. Amy Adams as Lois Lane, a reporter for the Daily Planet newspaper and the love interest of Clark Kent. Adams was selected from a list of actresses that included Kristen Stewart, Zoe Saldana, Olivia Wilde, and Mila Kunis. There was a big, giant search for Lois, Snyder said. For us, it was a big thing and obviously a really important role. We did a lot of auditioning, but we had this meeting with Amy Adams, and after that, I just felt she was perfect for it. Adams auditioned for the role 3 times, once for the unproduced Superman Flyby, and the second time for Superman Returns before landing the current role. Adams was confirmed to play Lois Lane in March 2011. While announcing the role, Snyder said in a statement, "We are excited to announce the casting of Amy Adams, one of the most versatile and respected actresses in films today. Amy has the talent to capture all of the qualities we love about Lois: smart, tough, funny, warm, ambitious, and of course, beautiful. On portraying Lois Lane, Adams stated that the film would feature a Lois Lane who is an independent, feisty woman, but set in a more identifiable world. Adams said that she has become more of a free-ranging journalist, someone who likes to be hands-on. The nature of the newspaper business has changed so much. There is so much more pressure. Michael Shannon as General Zod, a Kryptonian general with the same superpowers as Superman, bent on transforming Earth into a new Krypton under his reign. Viggo Mortensen and Daniel Day-Lewis were also considered for the role. Snyder stated, "Zod is not only one of Superman's most formidable enemies, but one of the most significant because he has insights into Superman that others don't." Michael is a powerful actor who can project both the intelligence and the malice of the character, making him perfect for the role. When Goyer was asked about why Zod was chosen as the villain, he stated, "The way Christopher Nolan and I have always approached movies as well is you never say, 'Hey, which villain would be cool for this movie?' You start with the story first. What kind of story? What kind of theme do you want to tell?" So we worked that out. Then, usually, the villain becomes obvious in terms of who's going to be the appropriate antagonist for that. When you guys see the movie, the only villain we could have used was Zod and the Kryptonians. I mean, when you see what the whole story is, nothing else would have even made sense. Kevin Costner as Jonathan Kent, Clark's adoptive father. Snyder explained his reason for his casting the on-screen couple is solely for the realism. I think the thing you realize when you look at Diane and Kevin, in our decision to cast them so far, you sort of get a sense of how tonally we're looking at the movie. And what you realize is that those guys are serious actors, and we're taking this movie very seriously in terms of the tone of having those guys. You're talking about having a situation where whatever the action is or whatever the drama of the movie is, our first priority is to make sure it's rendered in the most realistic way we can get at. Diane Lane as Martha Kent, Clark's adoptive mother. Lane was the first cast member to join the film after Cavill. This was a very important piece of casting for me because Martha Kent is the woman whose values helped shape the man we know as Superman, Snyder said in the release. "We are thrilled to have Diane in the role because she can convey the wisdom and the wonder of a woman whose son has powers beyond her imagination." Lawrence Fishburne as Perry White, editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet and the boss of Lois Lane. Fishburne is the first African-American to play Perry White in a live-action film. Fishburne remarked of his role, "My inspiration really is the late Ed Bradley, who was a CBS correspondent on 60 Minutes for many years. The legendary Ed Bradley was a friend, a mentor, and a role model for me, particularly because he worked in journalism. And he was the kind of guy who walked with kings, but he had the common touch, and so he was my inspiration for Perry." Anchitrau as Farrell, General Zod's sub-commander, and a commander of the Kryptonian military, who is completely devoted and loyal to Zod. Gal Gadot was offered the role but declined because she was pregnant at that time. This allowed her to be later cast as Wonder Woman in the film's sequel Alice Eve. Diane Kruger and Rosamund Pike were also considered for the role. About the role of Fiora, Trow said in an interview, "What I liked about her was that as a woman, we have certain doubts and we think too much sometimes about ourselves, and all these things, they're not there for Fiora. She's a bred warrior." So to really focus on that aspect, that fear is a chemical reaction and that it was bred out of her and she doesn't have it. It's liberating when you actually think about it, that you're just a one-track mind. There's no filter. There's no double meaning. She gets orders, and she answers those orders without a question. Islet Zurer as Lara Lore, Kal-El's biological mother and loyal wife to Jor-El. Julia Ormond had previously been announced as cast, but dropped out, 48. Connie Nielsen was in negotiations for the role before Zurer was cast. Nielsen was subsequently cast as Queen Hippolyta in Wonder Woman. Christopher Maloney as Caller Nathan Hardy, a United States Air Force officer, call sign Guardian, assigned to the United States Northern Command. Russell Crowe as Jor-El, a Kryptonian scientist who is Kal-El's biological father. Sean Penn and Clive Owen were also considered for the role. Crowe incorporates how his own fatherhood informed his reading of the script to portray Jor-El, stating that it was one of those things where that's how it was connecting me. That's the question that Jor-El faces. That's the situation that he's in. Crowe also comments on his preparation for the film, stating that when I signed on, well, one, I didn't realize that I would be wearing spandex, because that's Superman's costume. I didn't realize that I'd have to fit into it as well, Crowe said. But I also didn't realize the type of organizer that Zack Snyder is, because this was really old school prep. This is sort of David Lean level preparation, and I really appreciated him. And I was on the movie for 3.5 or 4 months before I even got in front of the camera. Additionally, Harry Lennox plays Lieutenant General Calvin Swanwick, a United States Army general officer and the Deputy Commander of United States Northern Command, 55. Christina Wren plays Capt. Carrie Ferris, a United States Air Force officer and the assistant to General Swanwick, 56. Richard Schiff plays Dr. Emil Hamilton, a scientist who works with the United States Armed Forces for DARPA. Carla Gugino portrays the voice of Kellor, the Kryptonian AI service robot. Mackenzie Gray plays Jax a Kryptonian scientist who is one of General Zod's followers. Michael Kelly plays Steve Lombard, an employee of the Daily Planet, and Rebecca Buller plays Jenny Jerwich, an intern of the Daily Planet. Jaden Gould, Rowan Kahn, and Jack Foley, respectively, play Lana Lang, Kenny Braverman, and Pete Ross, classmates of Clark Kent in high school. Joseph Cranford portrays Ross as in Richard Citrone. Samantha Joe, Rivard Dufresne, and Apollonia Vanova, respectively, play Toran, Carvex, Dev-M2, and Nadira, Kryptonian soldiers that follow General Zod. Production, development. In June 2008, Warner Bros. Took pitches from comic book writers, screenwriters, and directors on how to successfully reboot the Superman film series. Comic book writers Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, Jeff Johns, and Brad Meltzer were among those who pitched their ideas for a reboot. I told them, it's not that bad. Just treat Superman Returns as the Ang Lee Hulk, Morrison said. Waid said, the Incredible Hulk has proven the audience will forgive you and let you redo the franchise. Morrison's idea was similar to his work on All-Star Superman, while Waid's was akin to Superman Birthright. Mark Miller, teaming with director Matthew Vaughn, also planned an epic 8-hour Superman trilogy, each installment released a year apart, similar to The Lord of the Rings. Miller compared it to the Godfather trilogy, in which it would chronicle the entire life of Superman, from the early days of Krypton, where little Kal-El witnesses his father's tireless struggle to save the planet, to the finale, where Superman loses his powers as the sun starts to go supernova. According to Miller, Vaughn suggested his Stardust actor Charlie Cox as a Golden Age-inspired Superman when he was a bit more of a regular person. Vaughn would later say his pitch for a trilogy film would have been to a similar tone to Richard Donner's 1978 film, and would have included villains such as Zod, Brainiac, and Lex Luthor. In August 2008, Warner Bros. Suggested that the planned sequel to Superman Returns, subtitled Man of Steel by director Bryan Singer, would now be a reboot of the film series. Studio executive Jeff Robinov planned to have the film released either by 2010 or 2011, explaining that Superman Returns didn't quite work as a film in the way that we wanted it to. It didn't position the character the way he needed to be positioned. Had Superman worked in 2006, we would have had a movie for Christmas of this year or 2009. Now the plan is just to reintroduce Superman without regard to a Batman and Superman movie at all. Paul Levitz stated in an interview that Batman holds the key to the Superman reboot. He elaborated, everyone is waiting for Nolan to sign on for another Batman. Once that happens, the release date for Superman and all other future projects will follow. In February 2009, McGee, who previously planned to direct Superman Flyby, expressed interest in returning to the Superman franchise. August 2009 saw a court ruling in which Jerry Siegel's family recaptured 50% of the rights to Superman's origins and Siegel's share of the copyright in Action Comics #1. In addition, a judge ruled that Warner Bros. Did not owe the families additional royalties from previous films. However, If they did not begin production on a Superman film by 2011, then the Siegel estate would have been able to sue for lost revenue on an unproduced film. The plot of Man of Steel employs a non-linear narrative and tells parts of the story in flashbacks. During story discussions for The Dark Knight Rises in 2008, David S. Goyer told Christopher Nolan his idea regarding how to present Superman in a modern context. Impressed with Goyer's concept, Nolan pitched the idea to the studio, who hired Nolan to produce and Goyer to write based on the financial and critical success of The Dark Knight, 85-80. Nolan admired Singer's work on Superman Returns for its connection to Richard Donner's version, stating that a lot of people have approached Superman in a lot of different ways. I only know the way that has worked for us. That's what I know how to do. Emphasizing the idea that Batman exists in a world where he is the only superhero, and a similar approach to the Man of Steel would assure the integrity needed for the film. Nolan, however, clarified that the new film would not have any relationship with the previous film series, in which he commented, "Each serves to the internal logic of the story. They have nothing to do with each other." Robinov spoke to Entertainment Weekly and allowed a peek over the wall of secrecy surrounding their DC Comics plans. It's setting the tone for what the movies are going to be like going forward. In that, it's definitely a first step. Plans included for the film to contain references to the existence of other superheroes, alluding to the possibility of a further DC universe, and setting the tone for a shared, fictional universe of DC Comics characters on film. Guillermo del Toro, with whom Goyer worked on Blade 2, turned down the director's position on the reboot because of his commitment on a film adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness, while Robert Zemeckis was also approached. Ben Affleck, Darren Aronofsky, Duncan Jones, Jonathan Liebsman, Matt Reeves, who would direct a Batman reboot, and Tony Scott were considered as potential directors, 91. Before Zack Snyder was hired in October 2010, casting began the following November, 93-94. Snyder confirmed both Booster Gold and Batman references in the film, indicating their presence in the DC shared film universe. When Zod destroys a satellite, the words Wayne Enterprises are scrolled on the satellite. Snyder and Nolan considered having Man of Steel share continuity with the Dark Knight trilogy, but ultimately decided against it. In the original script, Zod was going to getting sucked into the Phantom Zone, but Snyder and Goyer felt it was unsatisfying, so they asked DC Comics if Superman would kill someone if he didn't have a choice. Nolan was against this approach, leading Goyer to come up with the scene with the heat vision and putting people in imminent danger, and this convinced Nolan. The film's storyboard was created by storyboard artist Jay Oliva in his first live-action feature film project, along with Snyder. Oliva has cited the Japanese anime shows Dragon Ball Z and Birdie the Mighty as an inspiration for the film's epic battle scenes. During the film's brainstorming, Oliva pitched the idea as, "I could come up with something I've never seen in live-action American cinema and only in anime." Filming. Principal photography began on August 1, 2011, at an industrial park near DuPage Airport under the codename Autumn Frost. Zack Snyder expressed reluctance to shooting the film in 3D due to the technical limitations of the format, and instead chose to shoot the film two-dimensionally and convert the film into 3D in post-production for a 2D, 3D, RealD 3D, IMAX 3D, and 4DX release. Snyder also chose to shoot the film on film instead of digitally because he felt it would make the film a big movie experience. Cinematographer Amir Mokri shot the film with Panavision Panaflex Millennium XL2 cameras and C-Series anamorphic lenses. Filming was expected to last for 2 to 3 months. Production took place in Plano, Illinois on August 22nd to 29th. According to an interview with Michael Shannon, filming would continue until February 2012. Man of Steel filmed in the Chicago area, California, and Burnaby's Mammoth Studios in Vancouver, which was used as a set for Krypton and the extraterrestrial aircraft portrayed in the film. Vancouver's North Shore waterfront area was also used for the oil rig rescue scene where Superman is first introduced. Ucluelet and Nanaimo, British Columbia, feature prominently in the film's first hour. The trademark winter mist and rough seas are passed off as Alaska in the film. Filming took place in the Chicago Loop from September 7th to 17th. The Chicago shoot was a unit project, meaning that filming would partake numerous establishing shots, as well as cutaways, and might not necessarily include principal cast members. Design. Man of Steel features a redesigned Superman costume by James Acheson and Michael Wilkinson. The costume preserves the color scheme and S logo, but adopts darker tones and notably does not feature the red trunks usually worn by Superman. Zack Snyder said the costume is a modern aesthetic. He and the producers attempted to devise a suit featuring the red trunks, but could not design one that fit into the tone of the film, leading to their removal from the suit. Because of Wilkinson's unavailability, Snyder chose Acheson to design the suit. However, he only started developing it, and Wilkinson finished the development when he returned and designed the other characters' costumes as well. Due to the substantial weight a practical suit would yield, the Kryptonian armor for General Zod was constructed through CGI to allow Shannon freedom of movement. In a March 2014 interview with Esquire, Wilkinson explained the reason for the look of Superman's redesigned suit. A lot of the efforts we took in the film were to explain why the suit looks the way it does. We didn't want it to be a random ornamental decision. We start the film on the planet of Krypton, which is where the suit comes from, and we go to great pains to show the suit fitting into the culture. All of the people you see on Krypton are wearing this chainmail-like suit with the same detailing as the Superman suit. Everyone has their family crests on their chests. The cuff and the boot details are shared through all of the different characters we meet on Krypton. So by the time we see Superman in his suit, we understand why it looks the way it looks. Visual effects. In the modeling and animation aspect of the liquid geometry, Goodwin explained, we had to develop a pipeline to bring in assets. So instead of going through the route of reducing the polygon count to something usable, what we would then do, you would take the model in whatever way it was made and just scatter discrete points onto it, and extract the matrix onto the animation and copy these points onto the matrix and have these sparse points behaving in a way that the model would. After the animation, artists duplicated the beads onto the animated geometry for a pre-simulated lighting version to get approval on how the object would read. Sims were then run on all the targets, which would be discrete beads floating around on top of the surface, which would have its own set of parameters. in which Goodwin further explained, the bead size, or the turbulence that would crawl along the surface, constantly updating the orientation, was based on the normal provided by the surface. That was then saved to disk, and we would use that sim as the final target for the simulation. After the simulation process, Weta Digital ran every bead through a temporal filter to remove jitter to control the noise. Lighting solutions directly worked on the set. Weta used RenderMan to take advantage of improved ray tracing and instancing objects. The sequences where Superman uses close combat fight scenes with the other Kryptonians proved to be a major challenge for the filmmakers and the visual effects crew. Desjardins explained, "When we do these fights and these hyper-real things, we don't want to do the traditional, okay, I'm a cameraman, I'm shooting a clean plate, I'm going to pan over here to follow the action that's not really there yet, but we'll put the action in later." Because that's us animating the characters to the camera. So we would do that animation with the characters, grappling, punching, or flying away, and we would take the real guys up until the point until they were supposed to do that, and we'd cut. Then we'd put an environment camera there and take the environment, and then a camera for reference of the actors and get each moment. So then we had a set of high-res stills for the environment and the characters. Then, in post, we take the digi-doubles and animate them according to the speeds we want them to move in our digital environment. MPC handled the visual effects for the Smallville encounter sequence. Before providing the visual effects, the shots were pre-visualized for the fight choreography. After the pre-visualizations, live-action portions of the scene would be filmed in small pieces. If, say, Superman was being punched and would land 50 meters away, we would shoot our start position and end position, and then bridge that gap with the CGI takeovers, says Guillaume Rocheron, the MPC visual effects supervisor. A camera rig would then obtain key frames of the choreographed actor. Desjardins said, "It's a 6-still camera rig that's built on a pipe rig so that you can run it in at the end of a setup and get stills of key frames of a performance or an expression. And then we could use those high-res stills to project onto the CGI double and get really accurate transition lighting and color, right from the set." On set, a camera rig was used to capture the environment of the sequence. Dubbed EnviroCam, the visual effects crew would mount a Canon EOS 5D and a motorized nodal head, allowing the crew to capture the environment at a 360-degree angle with 55K resolution for every shot. The process would take approximately 2 to 4 minutes. The set capture resulted in lighting and textures that could be reprojected onto geometry. Full-screen digital doubles were a major component for the fighting sequences. Digital armor was also added, along with the energy-based Kryptonian helmets. Cyberscan and fax were conducted with the actors, and polarized and non-polarized reference photos were taken. Superman's cape and costume were scanned in high detail. The cape, in particular, became a direct extension of Superman's actions. For the sequences involving the terraforming of the city metropolis, Double Negative handled the visual effects for the sequence. To construct a metropolis that seemed convincing and realistic, Double Negative used Esri's city engine to help procedurally deliver the city. According to Ged Wright, a Double Negative visual effects supervisor, it was a much more sci-fi-based role. So we took what they had done and extended it a great deal. The work we were doing was based around the downtowns for New York City, LA, and Chicago, and that gave us the building volumes for heights. We'd skin those volumes with kit parts, but most of it then had to fall down. So we had to rig it for destruction and use it for other aspects of the work as well. For the destruction of the buildings, the studio rewrote its own asset system to focus towards its dynamic events. The bullet physics software was a heavily impacted component for the use of the destruction. Wright said that, "We wanted to be able to run an RBD event and trigger all these secondary events, whether it was glass or dust simulations. All of those things needed to be chained up and handled in a procedural way." One of the advantages of this was that, because it was all based around a limited number of input components, you can make sure they're modeled in a way they're usable in effects. You can model something, but there'll be another stage to rig it for destruction. Fire, smoke, and water stimulation tools were developed at the Double Negative studio. The studio transitioned between the existing proprietary volume rendering software to rendering in Mantra for elements such as Fireball sims. Double Negative also used the in-house fluids tool Squirt to handle larger-scale sims and interaction for more tightly coupled volumes and particles. Regarding the battle between Superman and Zod, Double Negative implemented real photography onto its digital doubles. Music. Main article, Man of Steel soundtrack. Hans Zimmer initially denied popular rumors that he would be composing the film's score, but in June 2012, it was confirmed that Zimmer would, in fact, be doing so after all. To completely distinguish Man of Steel from the previous films, the iconic Superman March by John Williams was not used. Hans Zimmer's soundtrack for Man of Steel was released publicly on June 11, 2013. An unofficial rip of the musical score from the third trailer, entitled An Ideal of Hope, confirmed to be a cut-down version of the track What Are You Going to Do When You Are Not Saving the World, was released on April 19th. In late April, the official track listing of the 2-CD deluxe edition was revealed. Themes. Many reviewers interpreted Man of Steel as a religious allegory, especially since Warner Brothers set up a website that contains a 9-page pamphlet entitled Jesus, the Original Superhero. Justin Craig compares Kal-El's struggle to the Passion of Christ, stating that Kal-El is more than willing to sacrifice himself to save the people of Earth. Originally reluctant to reveal his identity and powers to the world, Superman decides to turn himself over to Zod to save humanity from annihilation. Craig also states that there is an allegory to the Trinity within Man of Steel. Jor-El returns to Kal-El on Earth as a ghost, guiding his budding superhero son on his journey to salvation. Before Jor-El sends his son off to Earth baby Moses style, he tells his wife that, like Jesus, he'll be a god to them. Paul Asay of the Washington Post writes that Superman floats in space with his arms splayed out as if nailed to an invisible cross, a fact that Craig also mentioned in his assessment of the film. The protagonist of the film is also 33 years old and seeks counsel at a church. Writing for the Huffington Post, Colin Liotta compared Zod to Adolf Hitler, citing, "He feels his vision for a pure Krypton, i.e. a society like the one Hitler envisioned with his eugenics program, is the only answer for survival." The sequence where a young Clark's powers overwhelm him in grade school, leading to him shutting himself in a closet, has led many to speculate that DC Extended Universe Superman is either autistic or meant to represent the struggles of autism. Marketing. Warner Brothers and DC Comics won the rights to the domain name manofsteel.com in use by a member of the public for use for the film's official website. On November 20, 2012, for the release of The Dark Knight Rises DVD and Blu-ray, Warner Bros. Launched a countdown on the film's website, where fans could share the countdown on websites like Facebook or Twitter to unlock an exclusive reward. On December 3, 2012, the exclusive reward was revealed to be an official Man of Steel teaser poster. The poster, which depicts Superman being arrested, generated a positive response and much speculation about the film's story. On December 10, 2012, a website appeared at dsrbuproject.com that provided audio signals to be decoded by viewers. It was discovered to be related to the film due to the copyright on the website 33. By December 11, 2012, the decoded message led readers to another website with a countdown that led to the public release of the trailer. In anticipation of the film, Mattel unveiled a toy line, which includes Movie Masters action figures. In addition, LEGO released 3 Man of Steel sets, inspired by scenes from the film. Ruby's Costume Co. also released a new line of Man of Steel-inspired costumes and accessories for both kids and adults. The film has reportedly earned over $160 million from promotional tie-ins. Viral marketing campaigns for the film began when the official website was replaced by Deep Space Radio Waves. The message was decoded to reveal a voice that said, "You are not alone." The official site continued to be updated with new static files that slowly revealed the symbol for the film's villain, General Zod. Shortly after, the website was replaced with a message from Zod, who requested that Earth must return Kal-El to his custody and told Kal-El to surrender within 24 hours or the world would suffer the consequences. A viral site called IWillFindHim.com was released that showed a countdown to the third trailer for the film. Warner Brothers enlisted Christian-based marketing firm Grace Hill Media to help spread the Christian themes of the film to the religious demographics. Special trailers were created outlining the religious tones due to Hollywood studios frequently marketing movies to specific religious and cultural groups. Warner Bros. Previously marketed films such as The Blind Side, The Notebook, The Book of Eli, and the Harry Potter series to faith-based groups. Warner Bros. Also asked Professor Craig Detweiler of Pepperdine University to create a Superman-centric sermon outline for pastors titled Jesus, the Original Superhero. Regarding this, Paul Asay of The Washington Post wrote that the religious themes keep coming: free will, sacrifice, God-given purpose. Man of Steel isn't just a movie, it's a Bible study in a cape. The messages are so strong that its marketers been sick explicitly pushing the film to Christian audiences. Release: Man of Steel held a red carpet premiere at the Lincoln Center's Alice Tully Hall in New York City on June 10, 2013, which featured the attendance of the principal cast members. The film received a wide release on June 14, 2013. The film was originally slated for release in December 2012, but it was pushed to the June 14, 2013 date to avoid competition with Warner Bros.' other film, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, which was released on December 14, 2012. It was released as a single-disc DVD, feature film only, on 2-disc DVD with bonus features, and respective Blu-ray and Blu-ray 3D combo packs on November 12, 2013, 146, and in the United Kingdom on December 2, 2013. As of January 2019, Man of Steel has sold more than 2.3 million DVDs, along with an estimated of 3.3 million Blu-ray discs, totaling 44.4 million, 76.2 million, respectively, for a total of $120.7 million in sales. The film was later released in 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray format on July 19, 2016. Reception. Box office: Man of Steel grossed $291 million in the United States and Canada, and $377 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $670 million, making it the highest-grossing solo Superman film of all time and the second highest when adjusting for inflation. It is also the second highest-grossing reboot of all time, behind The Amazing Spider-Man. Deadline Hollywood calculated the film's net profit as $42.7 million when factoring together all expenses and revenues, making it the ninth most profitable release of 2013. The film earned $116.6 million on its opening weekend, including $17.5 million from IMAX theaters. Man of Steel earned an additional $120 million from DVD and Blu-ray sales. Man of Steel made $12 million from a Thursday night Walmart screening program, and an additional $9 million from midnight shows. This marked Warner Bros.' third highest advance night midnight opening, and the biggest advance night midnight debut for a non-sequel. The film eventually earned $44 million during its opening Friday, including midnight grosses, and $56.1 million when the Thursday night showings are included. The opening day gross was the second highest for a non-sequel, and the 20th largest overall, 6. Its opening weekend gross of $116.6 million was the third highest of 2013, behind Iron Man 3, $174.1 million, and The Hunger Games: Catching Fire, $158.1 million, and the third highest among non-sequels, behind Marvel's The Avengers, $207.4 million, and The Hunger Games, $152.5 million. It also broke Toy Story 3's record, $110.3 million, for the highest weekend debut in June. The record was again broken 2 years later by Jurassic World's opening gross of $208.8 million. However, on its second, Man of Steel's box office fell almost 65 to 68% if the Thursday night gross is included, putting it in third place behind Monsters University and World War Z. Box Office Mojo called it an abnormally large drop, close to the second weekend decline for Green Lantern. Man of Steel earned $73.3 million on its opening weekend from 24 countries, which includes $4.2 million from 79 IMAX theaters, setting a June opening weekend record for IMAX, 151. The film set an opening day record in the Philippines with $1.66 million. In the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Malta, the film earned $5.6 million on its opening day and $11.2 million, $17.47 million on its opening weekend. Its biggest opener outside the United States was in China, with $25.9 million in 4 days, Thursday to Sunday. In total earnings, its three largest countries after North America are China, $63.4 million, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Malta, $46.2 million, and Australia, $22.3 million. Critical response. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 56% based on 344 reviews and an average rating of 6.2/10. The site's consensus reads, Man of Steel's exhilarating action and spectacle can't fully overcome its detours into generic blockbuster territory. On Metacritic, the film received a weighted score of 55 out of 100 based on 47 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audience polls in North America from CinemaScore for the film tallied an average grade of an A- on an A+ to F scale, with those under the age of 18 and older than 50 giving it an A. Cavill's performance as Superman earned mixed reviews, with some critics commenting on perceived stiffness and a lack of charisma. Richard Roper of the Chicago Sun-Times said that Man of Steel covered no new ground with regard to Superman films, and instead were plunged back into a mostly underwhelming film, with underdeveloped characters and supercharged fight scenes that drag on and offer nothing new in the way of special effects creativity. The Boston Globe's Ty Burr wrote, What's missing from this Superman saga is a sense of lightness, of pop joy. The Washington Post's Ann Hornaday stated that with Hans Zimmer's turgid, overproduced score, the film is an exceptionally unpleasant viewing experience. For the Denver Post's Lisa Kennedy, the chief problem with Man of Steel is the rhythm and balance in the storytelling and directing, which resulted in a film that swings between destructive overstatement and flat-footed homilies. Speaking to Fox Business Channel, Gray Drake, senior editor of Rotten Tomatoes, expressed dismay over the critical reception, stating, "As much as I love and respect our critics at Rotten Tomatoes, I've got to say I am shocked. Listen, the movie's not perfect, but I just cannot fathom it. It was a good movie, you guys." Review. I have a complicated relationship with Man of Steel, Zack Snyder's 2013 big screen reboot of Superman. In the cinema, I liked it, albeit with some caveats. On home video, I felt the other way around, that those earlier caveats crippled the movie, and that the more positive aspects simply weren't strong enough to redeem the film. 8 years on, and I find myself somewhere in the middle. Man of Steel is one hell of a mess, but it definitely has something to it that has tempted me back yet again. Curate's egg is rather a stereotypical term to apply to a work, but in this case, it is probably the most appropriate one to use. If you have never seen the film and want to, I must warn you, I will unavoidably spoil the film's ending below. Very quickly, when his home planet Krypton is destroyed, an infant Kal-El is safely hidden on the planet Earth, where he is adopted by Jonathan, Kevin Costner, and Martha Kent, Diane Lane. As the adult Kal-El, Henry Cavill, now living under the name Clark Kent, tries to find his place in the world while hiding his superpowers, Earth comes under threat from Kryptonian General Zod, Michael Shannon, and his soldiers, who plan to capture Kal and terraform Earth into a new Krypton. Here is the main problem. It is a solid movie, but a terrible Superman movie. Superman is an upbeat social justice power fantasy in which a superhuman protagonist solves crimes and rescues people from disasters. If you go back and read the original Action Comics stories by creators Siegel and Schuster, he has a pretty limited power set. He can run faster than a speeding bullet, is more powerful than a locomotive, and is able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. That was honestly about it at first. Every other power associated with the character came as later generations of writers looked for methods of jazzing up the narrative, including flight, heat and X-ray vision, superhearing, and the ability to hold his breath in space. Despite a growing power set, however, his core purpose remained to fight crime in Metropolis, a thinly veiled replica of Manhattan. He cares about the little people. He is loved by the little people. He would never ever kill. Along comes Man of Steel, riding the back of Christopher Nolan's successful Dark Knight films and directed by rising star Zack Snyder, 300, Dawn of the Dead. It has a very simple rationale to separate it from earlier Superman films. It will be a realistic take on the character. It will specifically be a post 9/11 take as well, relying heavily on that terrorist attack's imagery as indelibly related through news media in 2001. This is already a terrible take for a Superman story. Superman is an upbeat, bright character. I have this half-baked theory that the comic book characters can be split into day and night types. The night characters work well in contemporary film and television, as they are grim and bleak and generally hopeless and can comfortably survive a shift from children's entertainment to an all-ages product. Characters like Batman, the Punisher, Green Arrow, and Daredevil thrive in this environment. The daytime heroes are much harder to shift into an all-ages format because adult audiences tend to struggle with anything too bright and silly. Superman is often described as a Boy Scout, a big, goofy, primary-colored hero without physical limits, but with a rigid code of right and wrong. Making the character more realistic in Man of Steel's case means making him darker. A darker Superman can make for strong drama, but it will cause the core mythology of the character to collapse. Man of Steel reworks the character's rural Kansas childhood, turning adoptive father Jonathan Kent from the noble farmer who teaches Clark right from wrong to a paranoid man full of fear, warning his son that the broader world will not accept or trust him. It's a realistic enough take, but ignores the central element that Superman is innately trustworthy. This change leads into a second problem, that the adult Clark hides himself and his powers from the world. In Man of Steel, the world's first experience of Superman is as an alien hiding among them who must be revealed upon the threat of more aliens devastating humanity. The public do not trust him because he has done nothing to earn their trust. Compare this to Richard Donner's masterful Superman the movie, 1978, in which half an hour is dedicated simply to showing Christopher Reeve's Superman doing good deeds around Metropolis. Man of Steel is particularly egregious when it comes to screen violence. Snyder directs a film where the powers of Kryptonians like Superman are taken to a logical extreme. When Superman battles Zod, entire buildings collapse. Huge explosions level city blocks. Literally billions of dollars in property damage is generated by a single fistfight. And while Snyder goes some way to sanitize the effect, it isn't difficult to work out thousands of people will have died. At the film's climax, Superman is given no option but to snap Zod's neck. While promoting the film back in 2013, Snyder talked considerably about how this was part of his realistic take. That audience knew Superman wouldn't kill, but why? That Snyder felt Superman needed a specific life experience to turn him against murder says an awful lot at why the director's take on the character was so blindly misguided. Why doesn't Superman kill? Why aren't there more grim, realistic takes on Superman out there? Why does Superman fight crime when he could solve world hunger? If we change any of these things, then he is no longer Superman, just an identical power set and $100 million worth of computer-generated effects. This is the problem with Man of Steel. The film is wonderfully cast. It has some absolutely jaw-dropping effect sequences. The climactic city battle is superbly realized and executed on a near unprecedented scale. Hans Zimmer's score is close to a career best, with a central theme that actually rivals John Williams' celebrated 1978 version. It is simply bad Superman. From Warner Bros. Pictures and Legendary Pictures comes Man of Steel, starring Henry Cavill, Immortals, TV's The Tudors, in the role of Clark Kent, Superman, under the direction of Zack Snyder, 300, Watchmen. A young boy learns that he has extraordinary powers and is not of this earth. As a young man, he journeys to discover where he came from and what he was sent here to do. But the hero in him must emerge if he is to save the world from annihilation and become the symbol of hope for all mankind. The film also stars four-time Oscar nominee Amy Adams, the Master, as Daily Planet journalist Lois Lane, and Oscar nominee Lawrence Fishburne, What's Love Got to Do with It, as her editor-in-chief, Perry White. Starring as Clark Kent's adoptive parents, Martha and Jonathan Kent, are Oscar nominee Diane Lane, Unfaithful, and Academy Award winner Kevin Costner, Dances with Wolves. Squaring off against the superhero are two other surviving Kryptonians, the villainous General Zod, played by Oscar nominee Michael Shannon, Revolutionary Road, and Feora, Zod's evil partner, played by Antje Trau, upcoming The Seventh Son. Also from Superman's native Krypton are Lara Lor-Van, Superman's mother, played by Ayelet Zurer, Angels and Demons, and Superman's father, Jor-El, portrayed by Academy Award winner Russell Crowe, Gladiator. Rounding out the cast are Christopher Maloney, 42, as U.S. military man Colonel Hardy, Harry Lennox, State of Play, as General Swanwick, Michael Kelly, The Adjustment Bureau, as Steve Lombard, and Richard Schiff, TV's The West Wing, as Dr. Emil Hamilton. Man of Steel is being produced by Charles Roven, Christopher Nolan, Emma Thomas, and Deborah Snyder. The screenplay was written by David S. Goyer from a story by Goyer and Nolan, based upon Superman characters created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster and published by DC Entertainment. Thomas Tull, Lloyd Phillips, and John Peters are serving as executive producers. I'll be honest and say that I didn't really care for Man of Steel much, having only seen it recently for the first time. I already had my expectations lowered by friends who had seen it and by the reviews I read about it. I was prepared for the worst. It more or less met those expectations, so I wasn't pleasantly surprised, but I wasn't disappointed either. It was just a big meh. The title, Man of Steel, tells you what you're in for, a radical break from the past. The absence of the word Superman leads us to expect a top-to-bottom reimagining, and that's what the film delivers, for better and worse. This is a 2013 version of the story, dark, convoluted, and violent, chock full of 9/11-styled images of collapsing skyscrapers and dust-choked disaster survivors. It's sincere, but not particularly funny or sweet. The hero is a glum hunk, defending a planet so scared of apocalyptic conspiracy that it assumes anyone who presents himself as good guy must have ulterior motives. Steel is what you need to have in your spine if you're going to be super in this world. Directed by Zack Snyder, Watchmen, Sucker Punch, and overseen by Christopher Nolan, The Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, Man of Steel largely abandons the sunny spirit and kooky humor of the Christopher Reeve-starred films, as well as Bryan Singer's homage to them, 2006's Superman Returns. It brings the character in line with the recent craze for brutal, morose tales of loners defending a world that doesn't appreciate their sacrifices. This time, the big guy's suit isn't Dick Tracy red, blue, and yellow. It's a muted ensemble of synthetic chainmail that's described as battle armor rather than as a uniform or costume, and Supes wears his underwear on the inside. Thank you very much. Scene for scene, this is a first-rate example of a Hollywood fantasy released in the early 21st century, a new car smell summer blockbuster. It has wobbly handheld camera work signifying authenticity, a glum color palette, skyline-shattering superfights, hardware whose designs crib from Alien, Dune, Independence Day, and Spielberg's War of the Worlds, and a detailed mythology that can plug into an expansive, Marvel-style universe. When humor bubbles up, welcome though it is, it feels like a tonal lapse. Man of Steel also breaks with past Superman films in how it tells its story. The script, which is credited to David S. Goyer of the Blade films, starts with a prologue on Krypton, envisioned here as a John Carter-style land of towering hyperstructures, Matrix-looking hovercraft, and winged beasts. Superman's dad, Jor-El, Russell Crowe, and mother Lara, Ayelet Zurer, are fighting two battles at once: to convince the planet's government that its environmental recklessness is causing the planet's core to melt, and to contain a rebellion led by General Zod, Michael Shannon, who's outraged that Jor-El dared to violate Krypton's biological breeding protocol and conceive a son the old-fashioned way. Zod and his followers are exiled to the Phantom Zone in ships that look mortifyingly like the hero's spacecraft in the 1970s porn spoof, Flesh Gordon. The film's design is a riot of phallic and vaginal imagery, as most post-alien sci-fi films are. Krypton explodes, Kal-El zips off to Earth, and is raised by Ma and Pa Kent, Diane Lane, and Kevin Costner, in idyllic prairie surroundings that call for an Aaron Copland score, though Hans Zimmer does just fine. After the New Testament time span of 33 years, we pick up Kal-El Clark's story in time for him to unlock the destiny that his adoptive parents kept secret. Their motives were good. They predicted the hostility he would encounter once he put on his armor, to fight Zod and prevent Earth from being flattened to make a new Krypton. Zod's plot to create a resurrected Krypton echoes Superman Returns, though given that film's poor reception, I'm sure the filmmakers would rather nobody pointed them out. As the adult Clark Superman, Henry Cavill's not bad. In fact, he's quite likable and spectacularly handsome, natch. But there's no Reeve-like radiant comfort in his acting, because the character as imagined here is even more of a blank screen for our projections than most movie superheroes. Like Christopher Nolan's Batman pictures, the Goyer scripted Man of Steel reveals key moments in the hero's development through flashbacks triggered by present-day traumas. A few parts almost seem to be unfolding along simultaneous timelines, the past and the present. This is not just defensible but appropriate, considering that so much of the story is about having to function day to day while carrying around the crushing weight of your own past, as well that of an extinct mother world you never got to know. The most striking scenes show young Superman struggling to make sense of powers he can't display for fear of being labeled a freak or a monster. One early sequence shows young Clark zoning out during a school lesson because he's overwhelmed by the data hoovered into his brain by his super senses. When he looks at his classmates and teachers, he sees their bones and veins and organs through their skin, and because he hasn't mastered the art of filtering sound, he hears a cacophony of voices in his ears, like the burbling of a crowd at a ball game. There's a touch of The Incredibles in the scenes of Jonathan Kent explaining why Clark can't reveal the full extent of his specialness. Costner is superb in these moments, projecting an unforced, old movie-style decency that may remind fans of his performance in Field of Dreams. It's as if Ray Kinsella, the adult son in Dreams, has become the father in this one. An icon of kindness, yet sad-eyed and mysterious, worn down by life, as Ray described his own pop. When Clark, who's passed the years on a fishing boat while rocking a perfect storm beard, heads north and gets his own pad, the Fortress of Solitude, he acquires a second father, his biological daddy Jor-El. Supes the Elder becomes a present-tense Obi-Wan, advising and arguing with Clark, and later Zod. No, the film's most curious and unfortunate aspect, its Achilles heel, really, is the way it minimizes or shuts out women. You can see this tendency in the way Man of Steel handles Lois Lane, Amy Adams. She's portrayed as a capable reporter, more so than in previous films, but I didn't detect much chemistry between her and Clark, even when you factor in the ungodly pressure they're both under. While Clark is dealing with his demons and the world's, she's uncovering a government conspiracy to hide evidence of a buried Kryptonian spacecraft, then struggling against her Daily Planet editor Perry White, Lawrence Fishburne, for the right to publish a story she feels is true but can't prove. There are flirtatious moments between Lois and Clark, but they're few and far between, and I'm not convinced that the apocalyptic events surrounding the couple are the only reason. This is a butch Superman film, driven by machismo. Lois is an important character, but only for how she furthers Clark Superman's attempts to understand himself and claim his destiny. She's less of a fully realized human being than the kooky narcissist played by Margot Kidder in the Reeve films, or Kate Bosworth's Lois in Superman Returns, a melancholy figure defined by her ability to move on after the hero's sudden departure from Earth. Adam's Lois is tough and smart, but she has no personality, only drive, and she's not as integral to the action as she seems to be on first glance. It's telling that this movie gives equal weight to the story of a distrustful general, Chris Maloney, whose relationship with Superman lets him become the stand-in for a doubting Earth, a role filled by Lois in the 1978 film. Ma Kent is endearing, but she's not as powerful a presence as the doomed Jonathan. The hero's birth mother vanishes after the prologue, her absence explained in a throwaway line that Crow seems embarrassed to have to deliver. The uncharitable might notice that when a stupid question has to be asked or a trivial remark made, it's often delivered by one of a handful of women in a room full of burly guys. They may also note that while every significant male figure in Man of Steel is given an option to be physically brave under horrible circumstances, even gray-haired Pa Kent and Perry White have their moments. Females exist, for the most part, to be saved or to have things explained to them. Considering that every previous Superman movie put the courtship dance between men and women at the heart of its action, particularly Superman the movie, Superman 2, and Superman Returns, the fact that Man of Steel has a no girls allowed sensibility seems like a deliberate creative choice. It's as if the filmmakers want to reassure young male viewers accustomed to the glib swagger of Iron Man and the dire self-pity of Nolan's Batman trilogy that Superman is in the same wheelhouse. Zod's right-hand woman, Fajora Ul, Ansha Traue, is a powerful presence, but she's even more desexualized than Lois. Her character's main trait is a pathological hatred of men. This is certainly a different Superman movie than any of the others that we've seen, which means it will definitely have to dodge its share of criticisms. Some will surely have issues with the different tone of this film, and others will struggle with the creative liberties that do strip the picture of some of the things that the other Superman movies leaned heavily on. But when looked at as a clearly distinct Superman picture, I feel it holds up quite strongly on its own. I certainly don't want to discount the problems others may have with the film, but I think it's a movie that offers a unique vision laced with fun summer action while also showing a level of respect for the source material. David Goyer and Christopher Nolan put together the story, and the directing reins were handed to Zack Snyder. Their Superman universe starts by placing us into a crumbling planet, Krypton. It's a vision of the planet unlike any we've seen before, and we get some interesting doses of their society, political structure, and more importantly, the danger they're facing. Due to some ill-advised planetary resourcing, Krypton is on the verge of destruction. Understanding his planet's fate, Jor-El, wonderfully played by Russell Crowe, and wife Lara, Eilert Zurer, shoot their infant son Cal off the planet destined for Earth. With him is a codex which will ensure the survival of the Kryptonian race. We also meet the megalomaniacal rebel General Zod, Michael Shannon, an old friend of Jor-El's whose more violent solutions for survival seriously clash with the society. Man of Steel 3. From there, the movie jumps ahead 30 Earth years or so. Kal-El, Henry Cavill, now named Clark, is a wanderer who works as everything from a crab fisherman to a truck stop waiter. Along the way, he has left behind numerous stories of his superhuman heroism. Now, the tale of his arrival on Earth is familiar enough, and the film doesn't waste a lot of time going back over it. As a baby, he's found by Ma and Pa Kent, Diane Lane and Kevin Costner, and raised on their farm in Kansas. We see glimpses of his childhood through a series of very effective flashbacks. I have to say I loved this approach, and each jump back into Clark's past offered an interesting look at the different struggles and hardships he faced. Costner and Lane both give fabulous performances and inject some real emotion into the story. As you probably guessed, Zod and his followers track Kal to Earth and seek him out, hoping to regain the Codex and restore Krypton in their own genocidal way. It's here that Clark must either embrace the destiny set before him and protect his new home, or watch the human race be destroyed at the hands of his fellow Kryptonians. Through this, we get a lot of mulling and conversation about whether or not the human race is ready to accept a super alien species. That's soon tested after Clark saves the life of the spunky Lois Lane, Amy Adams, who insists on finding out more about her hero. This Lois Lane is quite different than the versions we've come to know, and this leads to one issue that I know some will have with the film. There's a wild inversion of events that takes place in Man of Steel that definitely affects the relationship between Lois and Clark. For me, their romance has always been a crucial function that makes his whole story work. Because of the chronological tinkering, I found their romance to be lacking, but it isn't completely ineffective. Adams gives a nice performance. It's just that her Lois feels so different than others. She's also much more out of the element that we're used to seeing her in. Overall, it didn't seriously bother me, but it didn't always feel right. Ella 4-6 score, Man of Steel. While the Lois character may have raised questions, I had none when it came to Michael Shannon's Zod. From his first moments on screen, he comes across as unstable and menacing. Shannon goes after it, and I never doubted him for a second. I also really liked Ansha Traue as Fiora, Zod's loyal second-in-command. She's dry and super serious, and she perfectly complements Shannon's performance. In movies like this, it's crucial to have a strong villain, and Shannon brings that. Many of my favorite scenes feature him, and none are better than when he makes his first appearance on Earth. I've mentioned many of the performances, but the real question mark for me was Henry Cavill. Could he capture the Man of Steel in a convincing way? The answer is yes. I liked Cavill here. I do think he's helped by the screenplay, which rarely asks him to do too much. But during the small scenes where he's needed to exhibit some range, he succeeds. This was a big deal because a poor performance from him could have derailed the entire production. Cavill has the look, the physicality, and the commitment to sell the character. There's no denying that Man of Steel sports a much more serious tone, and it lacks the lighthearted playfulness of the other movies. This has proven to be a hurdle that some just can't get over. In many ways, I welcome it. Man of Steel gives us a much more serious Superman story, but it's not without its share of funny moments. It just chooses to spend its time delving into some things we've rarely seen in the other films. I appreciated that, and it's one of the key things that keeps this from feeling exactly like every other Superman movie we've been given. Man of Steel 1, and of course, you can't talk about Man of Steel without getting into the action sequences and special effects. This is where Zack Snyder's fingerprints really show up. The film looks fantastic, and it features some really fun science fiction. Everything including the spaceships, Zod and his crew's wicked armor and air mask apparatus, the destruction of buildings and vehicles, it all is beautifully crafted and realized by Snyder's keen stylistic eye. And we see that eye at work a lot in this film. There is a ton of action here, but most of it is pulled off to great effect. Snyder shows off his effects with skill, except for in the big finale. It's here that about 5 minutes of crumbling buildings alone could have been left on the cutting room floor, and the movie would have been better for it. So how do I summarize all of this? Amid Man of Steel's booming action sequences and sky-high expectations lies a very good Superman reboot that I think shines in its uniqueness. Yes, a few of its directional choices don't work as well as I would have liked, and the final action sequence can be a bit numbing. But this has all the ingredients of being a franchise I can latch onto. I also appreciate that it steered the material away from cartoony and ventured to give us a more stern and grounded story. And I like that it brings the character back from the waste that Bryan Singer left him in. Man of Steel gives us someone bound by morals and committed to truth and justice. In other words, Man of Steel gives us Superman. All if this led to an experience that I found most satisfying, and I'm anxious to see what lies ahead for this franchise. It must be the last act of superhero revisionism, abolishing the word super. In this new movie, directed by Zack Snyder and produced and co-written by Christopher Nolan, the letter on our hero's chest doesn't mean what we all thought it meant. This is no English S, but a Krypton symbol denoting hope. The word Superman is stutteringly or suspiciously pronounced, like the Batman in the Dark Knight movies. He is referred to by his Earthling name, Clark, or his Krypton name, Kal-El, or even as the alien, by the frowning Pentagon Brass. This is a 21st century superhero who must steel himself against the agonies of being misunderstood by the people he is trying to help. The origin myth is perhaps the most interesting part of any superhero story. For some, the only interesting part. Snyder has created a colossal, grandiose genesis for the Man of Steel, a titanic Moses out of Nietzsche tale, a planet-clashing spectacle that is seen perpetually through a glowing, lens-flaring light, the opposite of the twilight of the gods, the daybreak of the titans. We go way, way back, substantially before Clark Kent coolly makes his career leap into journalism, joining the Daily Planet as a stringer, a move that incidentally shows that CV faking must be one of his superpowers. There are some striking ideas and images, and interesting casting for the chief role. To go with his gym-built, digitally assisted pecs, abs, and thighs, Britain's Henry Cavill has a thin, intriguingly pale and sensitive face, with a buttock cleft on his nose, like George Osborne, a nose that will surely make him very identifiable up close in the Planet newsroom. Chunky glasses or no chunky glasses. Cavill's Clark has a fraught relationship with his tough foster mom and troubled foster dad. Nice performances from Diane Lane and Kevin Costner. He faces off satisfyingly with his terrifying Krypton enemy, General Zod, of whom more in a moment. But this story doesn't quite have the wit of Joss Whedon's Assembly of Avengers, nor the gothic seriousness of Nolan's Dark Knight, and the all-important romantic spark with Lois Lane, played by Amy Adams, sadly isn't there. There's naturally a lot of swooping and flying, compulsory for 3D films. Snyder and Nolan have modified the beginning of the story so that a primal clash has been designed into the narrative from the get-go. There is, as yet, no sign of the famous adversary Lex Luthor, although keen-eyed observers will later note trucks on the streets of the metropolis belonging to LexCorp. The planet Krypton is dying because of environmental issues. Dignified soldier statesman Jor-El rails against mismanagement of the planet's resources. He is played by Russell Crowe with a posh British accent, presumably hailing from a part of the planet far distant from that of General Zod, played by Shannon with an American accent. Zod uses the crisis to launch a failed mutiny against the planet's revered leaders. At the same time, Jor-El and his grieving wife, Lara Lorvan Islet Zurer, launch baby Kal-El in a tiny escape capsule as the planet is consumed by fire. The child finally arrives on Earth to be named Clark Kent, and the rest is history, remembered and effectively narrated in flashback glimpses by traumatized, grown-up Clark. But it isn't long before Zod reappears and makes his way to Earth with intergalactic dominion on his mind. The Man of Steel decides his loyalties are with his new friends, the Earthlings, who are nonetheless suspicious. Shannon does what he does as Zod, and this role has reasserted this actor's virtual monopoly on scary with a touch of integrity roles. He certainly won't be getting the Gene Kelly part in any upcoming remake of Singin' in the Rain. Zod's headbutting confrontations with Superman, and indeed Jor-El, always look plausible. And I liked Kal-El's epiphany of horror as he realizes what Zod's intentions are, a Pol Pot-style heap of skulls. Lois Lane is a pretty supercilious star journalist, on the trail of the Man of Steel ever since rumors of his adolescent feats of strength started to leak out, and prone to temper tantrums with her editor, Perry White, played by Lawrence Fishburne. "I'm a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter," she yelps. "Then act like it," booms Perry. That, of course, is what Amy Adams thinks she's doing, but her role is sketchily conceived in this fanboy creation. This is a great, big, meaty, chewy superhero adventure which broadly does what it sets out to do, though at excessive length. What I missed were the gentle, innocent pleasures of Superman's day-to-day crime-fighting existence, depicted in normal sunlight and in primary colors. The bullets exploding harmlessly on the chest, the casually lifted automobile, the look of horror on the faces of low-level bad guys, the awestruck Rockwell kids' gratitude. Due to the cataclysmic battle in this film, much of the Man of Steel's mystery and novelty have been used up. As the DCEU came to an end, I found myself with some unfinished business. I had watched and reviewed every movie in the franchise, bar one, the film that started it all. Well, it is time to fix that oversight as we jump back into the opening salvo of the Snyderverse, a foundation that might not have ever reached its intended zenith, but is still worth exploring. So to set the scene, we open with Lara Lorvan, Islet Zurer, in hard labor, as her husband, Jor-El, Russell Crowe, looks on. It is a healthy child, something to celebrate if it was not so dire. For you see, Krypton is falling apart, and just when things are at their worst, Zod, Shannon, makes a move on the throne. But while there is still hope, Jor-El makes his escape and makes it home just in time to launch his lifeboat and save his only son. It was a fraught trip, but the pod managed to make it to Earth and land in a little town called Smallville, Kansas, USA. The one thing I think this film did very well was casting Henry Cavill as Superman Kal-El. While we would see this more in movies like Mission Impossible Fallout, he clearly has the physicality needed for a role like this. You do feel like he could pick up a guy and throw him out of the atmosphere. There are also moments of genuine emotion that get lost in the mix going further. The rest of the dialogue does not give much for the actors to do, bar a couple of big, grandiose moments. Man of Steel was an incredible test for Zack Snyder, who was coming off of two relative commercial and critical duds, Legend of the Guardians and Sucker Punch. While he still enjoyed some fan and studio heft due to the wild, unforeseen success of 300, His first entry in the superhero genre, Watchmen, had divided audiences with its stylized take on one of the most revered superhero graphic novels. After the success of The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan helped single out Snyder as the man who would helm the film, which DC hoped would initiate a cinematic universe to rival Marvel's. Nolan says that David S. Goyer, who helped develop the stories for Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy and who wrote the screenplay for Man of Steel, came to him with an idea for how to present Superman to modern audiences, and Nolan took the idea to the studio. After considering a number of directors, Snyder was brought on to direct. With Man of Steel, not only did Snyder have to prove that he was still a bankable blockbuster filmmaker, but the film itself was laden with enormous expectations as a reimagining of one of pop culture's most iconic properties. While I think it's fair to say that Snyder passed the test, earning the right to make 2 sequels and help shape the DCEU, the result was far from an unmitigated triumph. Superman fans had objections. Warner Bros. Had hoped for even larger box office receipts, and regular filmgoers complained that it was too long and not enough fun. If 300 made Snyder a new film god, Man of Steel kept him ascendant, but just barely. Although I have many qualms and criticisms, Man of Steel nevertheless displays heroic ambition in striving to retell one of the modern world's most famous legends in a way that's faithful to the tale, while offering something new to 21st century viewers long familiar with the basic features of Superman. To be fair to Snyder, though, in my view, all of the existing Superman films are uneven. Richard Donner's Superman, 1978, while understandably beloved, is far from perfect. Nonetheless, it remains the most significant Superman movie and a touchstone for the superhero genre. Richard Lester's Superman 2, 1980, contains achievements as well as follies. Superman 3, 1983, and 4, 1987 are weak movies, yet not without their moments. Bryan Singer's Superman Returns, 2006, proved, however, that attempting to duplicate the successes of the first 2 Christopher Reeve films with their earnest idealism, cartoonish humor, and comic book settings, with the addition of updated special effects, didn't work for the new millennium. Snyder, Goyer, and Nolan pursued a different path to tell Superman afresh. I've always found C.S. Lewis's comments on myth to be particularly illuminating when discussing the superheroes that have achieved mythic status in our modern world. In his introduction to George MacDonald's fantasy novel, Lilith, Lewis describes a myth as a story where the mere pattern of events is all that matters. Any means of communication whatever which succeeds in lodging those events in our imagination has, as we say, done the trick. This mythic patterning of events is noticeable, for example, in how almost all iterations of Batman depict Bruce Wayne's parents' murder, even down to the detail of his mother's pearl necklace. Similarly, Superman's stories endlessly repeat the sequence of Kal-El's arrival on Earth, the doomed planet, the child in the lifeboat spaceship, his discovery by his Earthborn parents. These are patterns that have become lodged in the public's imagination, endowing superheroes such as Superman and Batman with the status of modern myths, regardless of what specific storylines DC continues to write about them in monthly comic book issues that only a core base now reads. Not all of Snyder's or Nolan Goyer's alterations and innovations to Superman's origin story are successful, but the film contains enough of the elements of the myth, enough of the events in the pattern, to be an effective retelling. What is more, Man of Steel possesses a number of intimate refashionings that bring new attention to aspects of the character. The effect of the film is to defamiliarize Superman rather than make him substantially different or new. Defamiliarization, a concept from literary theory that I've long studied and applied in my writing elsewhere on the site, involves the use of various artistic techniques to encourage an audience to see an object from a new perspective. In Man of Steel, Snyder reorders the origin story while placing new emphases in order to defamiliarize Superman's primary narrative. The effect of the film's approach to the familiar structure of the Superman origin story is refreshing and illuminating. After a 20-minute prologue, mini-epic on the planet Krypton, Man of Steel delivers a reordered telling of how Kal-El becomes Clark Kent, who becomes Superman. After the Kryptonian lifeboat spaceship crashes on Earth, Snyder's smash cuts to a fishing boat crashing through rough waves, skipping over the discovery of the baby by passing motorists, usually the Kents. In Snyder's version, certain familiar events, such as the Kents discovering the boy in the wreckage, are only related later on and indirectly, while other parts typically passed over are now fleshed out. Perhaps inspired by Bruce Wayne's wanderings in Batman Begins, the film explores for about half an hour what Clark did as an adult before going to Metropolis to become a journalist. Elegantly inserted into this newfangled story of a drifter ghost savior roaming the cold coastlines and forest highways, helping those in need until he meets his destiny on a Kryptonian spaceship buried in the Arctic ice, are a series of flashbacks relating the boyhood of Clark Kent. The flashbacks to Clark's childhood and adolescence fragment the new plot, intimately connecting events in Clark's wanderings to key events in The Boy, Clark's emotional and superpowered development. Demonstrating Snyder's often underappreciated dramatic direction, Clark's feelings govern the structure of this sequence, rather than a sequential narrative. Seeing a wandering Clark as a fisherman and on other odd jobs offers a new view on Kal-El's trials as an outsider, while also casting the young Clark in a Herculean mold. Snyder's defamiliarization of the most familiar superhero origin story does in fact shed new light and bring new attention to elements. Although I initially had misgivings, I've come to think this is the finest portion of the film. It's an artistic and insightful account of the famous character. Even though Man of Steel is something of a reimagining of Superman, participating with Batman Begins and Casino Royale in the 2000s reboot phenomenon, like those two, it also knows and appreciates the previous iterations of the character. But Man of Steel also fuses the familiar with the wider world of geek culture, which is one of Snyder's domains of expertise. Like those two other films I've just mentioned, Man of Steel is one of the better reboots out there, since its intention seems to be as artistic in orientation as it is commercial. The point of retelling the origin is to bring new emphases as well as revive the property's commercial storyline. We get the sense that Snyder has a definite perspective about the kind of Superman he wants to present. Other reboots, such as Jurassic World, seem primarily commercial and bring little new appreciation to the original material. In other words, Man of Steel makes me think differently about Superman in a way that Jurassic World doesn't really make me rethink the original film. The other dominant strategy Snyder utilizes is his deep knowledge of and affection for geek culture, be it sci-fi, fantasy, comics, video games, etc., to underscore new aspects of the story. For example, the wild world-building of Krypton is a mix of political intrigue and sci-fi action, featuring winged monsters and strange battle armor, and showing the influence of two important limited comic book series, John Byrne's The Man of Steel, 1986, and Mark Waid's Superman, Birthright, 2003-4. There are also touches of the Star Wars prequels, 1999, 2002, 2005, and Avatar, 2009, as well as the look of Peter Jackson's cinematic renderings of Tolkien, 2001-3. The reference to The Matrix, 1999, with the vats of Kryptonian children being grown, adds a dystopian tinge to the whole of Krypton, as does the plot point of Kryptonians mining their planet's core. However, Snyder's elusive fusion of sources can obscure the fact that the film is largely repeating the familiar patterns of the first Superman movie, 1978, similarly setting things up with an extended sequence on Krypton, in marked contrast to the breezy presentation of the origin in most early comic book and film short versions. Even the casting of a big-name actor like Russell Crowe as Jor-El echoes Marlon Brando's performance in the original film, while infusing Snyder's version with the more macho masculinity of the Gladiator star. Snyder's emphasis on action even renders Jor-El a warrior in addition to being a scientist, as he perfunctorily engages in armed combat with Zod. This is one of the places where the film goes wrong, reducing, like most blockbusters today, too much of the conflict simply to action. Throughout Man of Steel, Snyder's engagement with Christopher Reeve's Superman movies is more subtle and persistent than is often remarked on. Perhaps this is reasonable given that Superman was the first big cinematic blockbuster feature about a superhero. There were shorts and TV shows on screens before, but not a full-length, big-budget movie. Snyder's movie is generally working in relation to Reeves' Superman, offering points of contact and contrast. For example, early on, in his time as a drifter, Clark gets into a bar fight with a trucker, which recalls a couple scenes from Superman 2, in which a Superman without powers is badly hurt by a trucker. Similarly, the battle in Smallville replicates, with variation, the fight in a small town in Superman 2, when Superman faces Zod's Kryptonian minions for the first time. This raises an important question, though. Why did Snyder and Goyer borrow the General Zod storyline to provide the villain and central conflict for the narrative? I originally thought that it trapped the movie within the shadow of the Donner film, but it does offer a way to avoid recasting Lex Luthor, the main villain in all previous Superman movies, as the initial villain. Superman has never been known to have the same number of quality villains as Batman. Thematically, the Zod storyline allows Snyder and Goyer to truly explore the question of Superman as an alien, the contrast between Kal-El and Zod magnifying the response of humanity to outsiders as a dominant theme of the film. 2. Superman being an alien defines Snyder's approach throughout Man of Steel, shaping his borrowings from not only other Superman works, but also wider genre fare. For instance, the Kryptonian ship frozen in the Canadian Arctic ice recalls an old Fleischer Superman cartoon, The Arctic Giant, 1942, in which a dinosaur is found frozen in the Arctic. The ancient alien ship trapped in the ice also evokes The Thing from Another World, 1951. And its remake The Thing, 1982, as well as the X-Files movie, 1998. Overall, Man of Steel is framed as an alien invasion movie. I didn't fully appreciate how the alien invasion genre defines the film the first time I saw it. The Kryptonian ships hovering over cities clearly alludes to Independence Day, 1996, and the destruction of Metropolis channels 9/11 via Spielberg's War of the Worlds, 2005, an intertextual intersection that would be revisited in BVS. Snyder's exploitation of comic books and alien invasion stories also bends the film around the central question: how would a more realistic world greet an alien being with incredible powers? With fear and distrust is Nolan, Goyer, and Snyder's answer. Like many alien invasion and disaster movies, Snyder emphasizes the role of government, particularly the military, giving us the memorable imagery of Superman arriving in a desert to turn himself in and being escorted by special ops down a hallway to his interrogation room. Such imagery displays Snyder's ambiguous politics. Is this the typical Hollywood blockbuster military jingoism or a critique of military posturing? Since Superman laughably dismantles their attempts to contain him when the time is right. Having Superman and Lois Lane first encounter each other on the alien ship also drastically alters the relationship between the two main characters in the Superman myth, Kal-El, Clark Kent, and Lois Lane. This is perhaps the film's biggest alteration, one of the most controversial, along with allowing Superman to kill Zod, and in my view, the least satisfying choice. While I understand the reasons for having Lois know Superman's real identity, something is lost in the characters and their interplay. Clark Kent, who doesn't even become a journalist until the final minutes of the film, is barely a character. Christopher Reeve will never be bested as Clark Kent, playing up the perceived weakness of Clark with just enough winks at the audience to make everyone's underestimation of Clark a joke that we, the audience, are let in on with him. The final shot of Man of Steel teases at the possibilities of a story world in which Clark Kent hides his identity from most people, with only Lois knowing, as is the case in about half the seasons of Lois and Clark, 1993-97. But sadly, we never really get that world in the Snyder trilogy. Obviously, it wouldn't have fit with Snyder's tone and approach, which also noticeably removes Lois's main function as a damsel in distress in many Superman comics and cartoons, but it's still the loss of a core element, just as the removal of Robin, while fitting with Nolan's approach, is also a loss for the myth and character of Batman. In both films, important elements in the pattern have been removed, and their absence is felt. An exploration of Snyder's use of source material and allusions helps to explain the film's themes and narrative structure, but it's really Snyder's handling of formal features that defines his film's successes and weaknesses. Man of Steel contains some of Snyder's most hopeful, earnest, and heartfelt scenes, along with some of his most plotting action. In 2013, Man of Steel was at least exciting, simply because we had never seen Superman perform the action feats he does on screen. Superman Returns was noticeably one-dimensional in terms of action. Snyder deserves praise for opening up a full range of possibilities for action involving a man who can fly and move super fast and is as strong as anything on Earth. There's excitement to Superman flying, particularly the way Snyder has Superman charge up and burst from the Earth's surface, like some anime character. I also like Snyder's delight in unleashing all of Superman's powers, from his heat vision to flights in space to chilling breath. Snyder draws on his signature directorial strengths, the manipulation of speed and movement with fast and slow motion and free-ranging digital camera work to depict the slugfests between Kryptonians. They may be super fast, but they can still block each other. Snyder goes to great lengths showing the destruction these super beings wreak on the world around them. How many times can we see someone thrown through a building, though? In our superhero and CGI-saturated worlds, in which all fantasies are now renderable to varying degrees of verisimilitude, the long extended action sequences now lack even the wonder of the new. But it's not simply a matter of being an old hat. The key issue is duration. We get several climaxes in terms of narrative. Smallville against the Kryptonian henchmen, then stopping the World Destroyers, then stopping Zod, all in a row. The elegance of the back and forth between the drifter scenes and childhood flashbacks with smart visual transitions turns to a beastly train that keeps adding extra and bigger cars on the end. Just stop already. If all these scenes were drastically tightened overall, they would work, but they run on far too long. The last hour could be cut nearly in half. Snyder's tendency is always to play on the largest possible scale. It's operatic, mythic, grand, but something is lost, and too much is a fair criticism. The second half of Man of Steel exemplifies something I've long lamented in superhero films. Apart from the films of Christopher Nolan and parts of Zack Snyder's, our superheroes rarely actually fight crime anymore. Snyder has Batman fight sex traffickers and other criminals in Batman v Superman, and Superman rescues people in a few quick scenes in BVS, but Snyder's Superman never stops common crooks. His Superman fights supervillains and alien invaders. The sole exceptions are the childhood and drifter scenes, between about 20 minutes and 50 minutes in the runtime. It's a pleasure to see Superman save people, not just fight supervillains, and Snyder does it in a way that's emotional and affecting, not hokey, like the early scene in Wonder Woman 1984, in which she stops crooks at a mall. Superman doesn't need to be a journalist in Snyder's universe, because it gives him no special access to the kinds of villains and opponents his heroes face. Even Lois goes on to be more important as Superman's romantic partner than as a journalist. This actually further removes superheroes from reality, putting their conflicts in entirely unreal scenarios. They become only superheroes, no longer crime fighters, thus removing the characters largely from the realm of socio-economic concerns, which the original comics of the Depression-era 1930s fermented in. Perhaps the removal of journalism, crime fighting, and Lois Lane's dramatically ironic chemistry with Clark explain why the heart of Man of Steel and its best engagement with the Superman mythos are in the flashbacks. It helps that Kevin Costner and Diane Lane are great as the Kents. For instance, when Clark saves the kids on his school bus, Snyder gives us a nice revisionary account of Superboy. Afterwards, Jonathan Kent's comment that maybe he should have let the boy die is a startling admission and a change from our normal perceptions of the Kents. The Christopher Reeve movies understand the amazing power and hope in seeing someone save people from disasters and accidents, not just supernatural bad guys, and this is one of the few examples of such superheroics in Snyder's universe. Henry Cavill is very good as Superman, less so as Clark Kent, but as I said, we barely get Kent. Cavill's performance is particularly good at adding a world weariness combined with a deep yearning. His deep hope that Superman, as a symbol of goodness, can inspire others to choose the right path is clear to the audience. His destiny becomes bound up with the future of the human race. Will they join him in the sun as Jor-El prophesies. The film is also clearly a Christ origin story. The spaceship leaving was always a Moses story, but Snyder's take draws out the Christian parallels even more strongly. Moses' story foreshadows Christ's story in Christian readings of the Old Testament. The restructuring of events, with Kal-El's arrival in the spaceship, but without showing us the baby in the ship being found by the parents, makes it less a Moses story, and thus less a Christmas story, and more about the short narratives of the boy Christ. Clark is always being told by Jonathan that he has to choose his future destiny, whether to hide in obscurity and safety, or risk it and become the hero we need. His adopted father even says he can choose between good and evil. This functions as Clark's temptation in the wilderness, if you will, whether to use his powers for personal gain and power or for the salvation of the world in service. As Jonathan tells the teenage Clark, an encounter with a priest before a big decision not only is a throwback to the Americana of the Christopher Reeve movies, but also underscores the Christian themes present in much of the film. In Snyder's film world, religion is important, mostly for its relation to myth, as both explain the power of heroes. Religion is bound up with myth, and the hero myth in particular, as makers of meaning, on the broadest possible canvases as well as in individual lives. In his Best of the Decade list, incendiary contrarian critic Armand White describes Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, which White places at the front of his list, as the decade's most daring and unparalleled expression of our moral and aesthetic needs. I can agree with a moderated version of White's praise. I do think Man of Steel is a daring expression of our moral and aesthetic needs, but not an unparalleled one, and certainly not the decade's most important statement. At the same time, I believe that the movie is, in parts, a potent symbol of what went wrong with blockbuster movie making of the 2010s. Technical innovations unleashed the unrestrained depiction of fighting, destructive action, and sensory stimulus to the detriment of engaging storytelling and character development. The film is striking, for me, for combining polarized highs and lows of contemporary filmmaking. It has some of my favorite moments in Snyder's canon and some of my least. However, one thing that makes Snyder an interesting director is that his filmmaking project responds to criticisms, a truth that the ## release the Snyder Cut noise often obscures, and his later efforts to address the unrestrained destruction of Metropolis and Superman's willingness to kill in Batman v Superman and Justice League actually helped to mitigate this film's missteps. It's a discussion to be hashed out in our writing on those later films, but reading Man of Steel as part one in a trilogy actually makes it a better film. I'll end off with one of the film's final images, and perhaps its most memorable, as a key to the movie's themes and its emotional power: the boy in the cape, with the father watching him from a distance. Scenes like this, which perform the commendable task of evoking real emotion, not limited to the emotion generated by prolonged engagement with a set of characters, which Marvel's Endgame achieves, a scene that can move one to tears with its heartfelt desire for heroic goodness in the world, certainly pays the debts, and more so, of other sections that glaze the eyes and numb the mind. The image functions in two directions. Diegetically, it perhaps suggests that there's something within the young Clark Kal-El that remembers his ancestors, the House of El. You'll notice that Jor-El wears a cape at points on Krypton in the early parts of the film, and that Superman's costume, cape and all, is a Kryptonian relic preserved on the ship found in the ice. So the boy perhaps unconsciously remembers his original parentage and its heroic lineage. The second function is extra-textual. It's a signal to the audience, which, although it might not make much sense if we think it through, actually works intensely on the audience's shared experience of Superman. The image works because it activates our familiar knowledge of Superman as a man in a cape, the physical pattern of cape and arms heroically to the side. So many little kids play out almost unconsciously before they have ever even properly seen a Superman movie. The image of a young Clark, shot Terrence Malick style with a shaky cam and golden hour lighting, a dog before him, is also presenting us with a vision just different enough of that old Superboy to make us see him anew, afresh. I think it's a powerful example of film's defamiliarizations and a potent visualization of its core themes. Snyder's Superman is a symbol that evokes not only a godlike savior, but also the godly hero within each individual. As the Phantom of Jor-El instructs his son, the symbol of the House of El means hope. Embodied within that hope is the fundamental belief in the potential of every person to be a force for good. That's what you can bring them. Man of Steel demonstrates that Snyder conceives of heroes not as a special few among many, but as those, be they few or many, who realize and act upon their potential for heroism. For Snyder, a heroic elite is meant to be an inspiring and actualizing, rather than a limiting principle. Only a few survivors act heroically at the start of Dawn of the Dead, but most of them learn to within the course of the film. In 300, the heroic sacrifice of Leonidas inspires not just the Spartans, but eventually all Greeks to heroic resistance. In Man of Steel, Superman is something we can see in the sky, but also in other people. In a stranger who appears in the nick of time, whether the seasoned fisherman who saves the greenhorn, or the strange burning man who opens the door for the riggers to escape. That an employee might see in their boss during a crisis, in the case of Perry White. That a parent can see in their adopted child, that a wise scientist can see in a distant people's future, and that, ultimately, the stranger, the alien, will bring out in his new home. It's Snyder's attention and ability to evoke such themes that makes his Man of Steel, in spite of all its flaws in the forging and stretching out, a Superman movie of great strength and one worth remembering. Produced by Charles Roven, Christopher Nolan, Emma Thomas, Deborah Snyder starring Henry, Cavill, Amy Adams, Michael Shannon, Kevin Sean, Diane Lane, Lawrence Fishburne, Anne, Straw Iset, Christopher Maloney, Russell Crowe cinematography, Amir Mockery. Edited by David. Music by Hans Zimmer. Production companies Warner Bros. Pictures, Legendary Pictures, DC Entertainment, Syncope Peters. Entertainment, distributed by Warner Bros. Pictures. Release dates, June 10th, 2013 in Alice Tully Hall, June 14, 2013 in United States. Running time 143 minutes. Countries, United States, Canada, United Kingdom. Language English. Budget 225,258. Million box office 668 million. So guys, this is the review of Man of Steel movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please